पितानोऽसि पितानो बोधि नमस्तेऽस्तु मामाहिंसि विश्वानि देव सवित दुरितानि परासुव यद भद्रं तन्वासुव नमः शम्भवाय च मयो भवाय च ॐ शान्ति 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 हरि ओम्.
Shantiniketan, the abode of peace in West Bengal's Birbhum district. Debendranath Tagore had bought this land in the middle of nowhere, and Rabindranath, his son, made it into Vishwabharati, where the world makes its home in a single nest. Yatra Vishwam Bhavate Kanidam. Those who know Rabindranath only as a poet know merely a fraction of his towering genius. The ambience of Vishwabharati, so uniquely Indian in form and so universal in spirit, was the fruition of his rebellion against inert and borrowed educational norms and stifling social prejudices. To Rabindranath, Vishwabharati was more than a center of learning. To him, it was a microcosm of the universe from where he hoped the universal man would emerge. This unique institution is Rabindranath Tagore's greatest bequest to the nation and to mankind as a whole. This is the famous Chatim or Shoptopurni tree or Alstonia scolaris around which Shantiniketan grew. It was under this tree that Debendranath Tagore had meditated on his way to a place called Raipur. When Debendranath traveled to the Himalayas in 1873, he took Rabindranath, then a boy of 12, with him. They broke journey at Shantiniketan, and the enchanting landscape of Birbhum left an indelible mark on the boy's mind. That, perhaps, was the beginning of his craving for the outdoors, his lifelong yearning for nature. Debendranath had built this house on a 20-bigha plot in 1863 and named it Shantiniketan, which also lent the place its name. His intention was to set up a Brahmo ashram, which he did in 1888. The Brahmo temple was inaugurated 3 years later in 1891. Rabindranath came to stay here for some time with his family in 1892. In 1901, at the age of 40, he set up his school called Brahmocharjashram or Shantiniketan Brahmo Vidyalaya with just 5 students and Brahmo Bandhav Upadhyay as its first principal. As the number of students grew, Rabindranath was joined by a group of young visionaries, Mohit Chandra Sen, Ajit Kumar Chakraborty, Satish Rai, Jagadananda Rai, and Dinendranath Tagore, who set about implementing the poet's ideas. The initial years were financially difficult, but Mrinalini Devi, Rabindranath's wife, who played mother to the students, sold her ornaments to help the school out of trouble. But 1902 and 1903 were tragic years for the school and for Rabindranath personally. Mrinalini, his wife, and Renuka, his daughter, died in quick succession. Lesser men would have wilted at this twin tragedy, but he suffered it with stoicism.
I am steering my ship of life through gale and storm, battered by misfortunes, but I can't help marveling at the fact that despite all odds, the school is gaining in life and strength.
Here classes used to be held in the open, shunning the trivia of routine and syllabus, with music and dance forming essential aids to the learning process. Education here was a joyous adventure, offering a world of emotional, aesthetic, and spiritual experience for a true awakening of the heart and mind. But just when things were beginning to shape up, death struck again. Shomindranath, his younger son, died in 1907.
Why do you speak so softly? Death, death, creep upon me, watch me so stealthily. This is not how a lover should behave. When evening flowers droop upon their tired stems, when cattle are brought in from the fields after a whole day's grazing, you, death, death, approach me with such gentle steps, settle yourself immovably by my side. I cannot understand the things you say.
Shortly afterwards, Rabindranath was joined by two able lieutenants, Bidhu Shekhar Shastri and Kiti Mohan Sen. Around this time, Shantiniketan began celebrating the change of seasons through festivals like Barsha Mongol and Sharadotsav, set to tune as paeans to the ever-changing. In 1911, Shantiniketan observed the 50th birth anniversary of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. It was the first function of its kind to be held in the ashram. In 1912, Rabindranath went to England, taking with him son Rothindranath and daughter-in-law Pratima Devi. While in England, he met C.F. Andrews for the first time. Moved by his Gitanjali, Andrews decided to join Rabindranath in his ashram school. In just over a decade, Shantiniketan made its mark as a school with a difference. Here, teachers and students lived close to nature, as in ancient Indian hermitages, without any of the cheerless mental labor a school brings to mind. For Rabindranath believed,
freedom is essential to the mind in the period of growth, and it is richly provided by nature. Trees and rivers and blue skies and beautiful views are just as necessary as benches and blackboards, books and examinations.
W. W. Pearson and C.F. Andrews, two English friends of India, joined Shantiniketan in 1914. One of Andrews' first ventures was to arrange the visit to Shantiniketan of the students of Gandhi's Phoenix School at Natal in South Africa. Andrews also arranged Gandhi's first visit to Shantiniketan in 1915, and Gandhi's teachings on self-help moved everyone at the ashram. It was a time when Shantiniketan was looking outwards towards the great wide world, with Rabindranath preaching the message of internationalism among his students. But fate was unkind again. Bela, his daughter, died suddenly. The series of shattering bereavements could not, however, stall his mission. In 1920-21, Rabindranath went to England again, and internationalism became his guiding principle.
The Shantiniketan school must be made the thread linking India with the world. We must establish there a center for humanistic research concerned with all the world's people. The task of my last years is to free the world from the coils of national chauvinism.
Rabindranath inducted his son Rothindranath into the school administration, and a number of eminent men joined the school faculty. Among them were Nandalal Bose, Leonard Elmhurst, Sylvain Levy, Maurice Winternitz, Vincent Lesnie, and Sten Kono. With such stalwarts, Shantiniketan was poised for a big transformation. It was to become Vishwa Bharati. Vishwa Bharati was formally launched on December 23, 1921, with Shantiniketan and Sriniketan, the Department of Rural Reconstruction, as its two wings. Leonard Elmhurst joined as the director of Sriniketan, the groundwork having been done by Rabindranath's young disciple, Kali Mohan Ghosh. But Vishwa Bharati soon plunged into dire financial straits. Rabindranath began staging his plays in order to raise funds. The effort was a success. The clouds cleared as money began pouring in and life surged again in the temples of learning. Artist Nandolal Bose headed Kala Bhavan, the Department of Fine Arts. An artist of the Bengal school, Nandolal followed Rabindranath's principles of learning from life, learning from tradition, and evolving one's own style. Rabindranath himself contributed richly by drawing from his experiences gained in China, Japan, Ceylon and Java, making Kala Bhavan a premier art school where students flocked from different parts of the country. Shongit Bhavan, the Department of Music and Dance, was one of the bulwarks of Shantiniketan, for Rabindranath felt education without music was only half complete. The driving spirit behind Shongit Bhavan was Dinendranath Tagore, who died an untimely death at the age of 52. China Bhavan, the School of Chinese Studies, was established in 1937. It offered courses in Chinese language, literature, philosophy, history and culture. Many students came to study here from Tibet, Thailand and from Sri Lanka. In 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru came to Shantiniketan to inaugurate Hindi Bhavan, the Department of Hindi Studies. It was established with the aim of linking Shantiniketan with the literatures and philosophies of other Indian regions through the medium of Hindi. 2 years later, in 1940, Gandhi and Kasturba came to Shantiniketan for the last time to meet the ailing poet who was then 79. Rabindranath, aware of his own failing health and worried about the future of Vishwabharati in his absence, requested Gandhi in a letter to take charge of the institution after his death.
Before you take leave of Shantiniketan, I make my fervent appeal to you. Accept this institution under your protection, giving it an assurance of permanence if you consider it to be a national asset. Vishwabharati is like a vessel which is carrying the cargo of my life's best treasure, and I hope it may claim a special care from my countrymen for its preservation.
An era, it seemed, was coming to an end. Soon after Gandhi's visit, C.F. Andrews, Rabindranath's staunch friend and supporter, died. The poet himself was gravely ill. Medical facilities at Shantiniketan were inadequate for treating the complications. July 25th, 1941 was the day of parting. Frail and weak, Rabindranath Tagore was on his journey home, leaving behind the ashram where he had spent 40 eventful years in search of the universal man.
In this quiet and sparsely populated garden of shal trees, I started a school for children. I used to teach underneath an old jam tree. In every nation, education is intimately associated with the life of the people. But for us, modern education is relevant only because it turns out clerks, lawyers, doctors, magistrates, and policemen, the few favorite professions of the gentle folk. This education has not reached the farmer, nor the oil grinder, nor the potter. No other educated society has been struck by such disaster. If ever a truly Indian school is established, it must, from the very beginning, implement its acquired knowledge of economics, of agriculture, of health, and of all other everyday sciences in the surrounding villages. Then alone can the school become a center of the country's way of living. In Indian education, we shall have to collect together treasures of Vedic, Puranic, Buddhist, Jaina, and Islamic minds. We shall have to find out how the Indian mind has flown along these different channels. By some such means, India will feel her identity in her diversity.
On August 7th, 1941, Rabindranath Tagore died at his Jorashanko residence in Calcutta. Abanindranath Tagore, Rabindranath's nephew, Indira Devi, his niece, and Rothindranath took charge of Vishwabharati after his death and kept the institution firmly anchored to Gurudev's ideals. Rabindra Bhavan, the special museum and archive, was formally opened in 1942. It is the richest repository of Rabindranath's paintings, manuscripts, and books. To honor the poet's desire contained in the letter written to Gandhi, Abul Kalam Azad, Free India's first education minister, moved a bill in Parliament in 1951 to give central patronage to Vishwabharati, which was declared an institution of national importance. With the passing of the bill, Vishwabharati became a central university and Rothindranath Tagore its first vice-chancellor. Jawaharlal Nehru became its first chancellor, Acharya, followed, amongst others, by Indira Gandhi and later Rajiv Gandhi.
Vishwabharati was started as a great experiment in education to bring about a fusion of knowledge with values, of wisdom with the flowering of the human personality, of tradition with innovation, of science with culture, of nationalism with internationalism.
Shanti Deb Ghosh was one of the earliest students of Shongit Bhavan.
তিনি বারবার বলেছেন যে আমি একেও আমি মনে করি আমার জীবনের একটা অঙ্গ, এও একটা প্রয়োজন।
Rabindranath used to say, "My religious beliefs and my work are inseparably woven."
সত্য, আমার কর্মজীবনও আমার কাছে সত্য। তারপরে দেখলাম শান্তিনিকেতন।
In Shantiniketan, he introduced a system that made education a delightful experience.
নির্মল চিত্ত বিনোদনের একটা ধারা তিনি খুলে দিলেন। সেটা এখানকার সাধারণ শিক্ষার সঙ্গে ওতপ্রোতভাবে জড়িত করে, একটা নিজের শখের মতো নয় যে নিজে যেটা উপভোগ করছেন, উনি বলছেন যে আমি একলা কেন করব।
He made it a point to share the joys he derived from life with others. That is why he introduced art, dancing, music, dramatics, and sports at Vishwabharati. It was a very special milieu and a very special way of life. Konika Banerjee, one of the finest Rabindra Shongit singers, is associated with Shongit Bhavan. Shongit Bhavan curriculum includes Rabindra Shongit, Hindustani classical music, Manipuri and other Indian classical dances, and the playing of instruments like the esraj and the sitar. Nilima Sen, another leading singer, is the present principal of Shongit Bhavan. Kola Bhavan offers courses in painting, sculpture, wood carving, lithography, alpana or floor painting, needlework, batik, wax painting and leatherwork. weekly literary sessions are important extracurricular activities. At these sessions, children read and discuss their own works, thus growing familiar with the art of creative writing from an early age. Sriniketan, devoted to comprehensive rural development, is as important as Shantiniketan in the Bishwabharati framework. The backwardness of rural India had always troubled the poet's mind. So he had set up Sriniketan with an integrated program to improve life in our villages through non-formal education, vocational training, healthcare, animal husbandry, and above all through spreading scientific agricultural knowledge. Seasonal festivals, which were introduced by the poet, are still important facets of life at Bishwabharati. Among the more important ones are Poshotshab in December, Bashantotshab or Spring Festival coincides with Holi and is by far the most colorful of all festivals here. Vriksharopon, the tree planting ceremony, is held at the onset of monsoon in July-August. Village welfare was uppermost in Rabindranath Tagore's mind. The well-being of the nation, he believed, depended on the prosperity of the villagers. So he introduced what is called the holocarshan, or the ploughing ceremony, to focus on the importance of agriculture in our lives. Rabindranath had a premonition. He feared that after his death, Bishwabharati might lose its way. Where does Bishwabharati stand today? More than 4 decades after the poet's death?
Rabindranath started this experiment with a few good teachers who were receptive, who were sensitive, and who helped him in various aspects, and who were a real partner of Rabindranath in this experiment. They wanted to create an atmosphere here where the children would be free, where children would have sufficient scope of expressing themselves through different mediums. There was a lot of freedom given to students here. And there was no question of any competition. Examinations were not so important those days. But unfortunately, things have changed now. I'm quite sure the experiment is more relevant today when we have all kinds of problems in our society. There's hardly any place of, hardly any scope for cooperation. We always compete with each other in the present society, and I think one should take up the, one should study this institution properly, particularly what Tagore wanted it to be, and try to find out what mistakes we have committed, and it is really worthwhile to see whether this kind of institution can serve the present day society today or not.
I would like to say that from my experience during the last 3 years, I am more convinced that his educational philosophy, his ideas are perhaps more important, more relevant than what they were perhaps in his own lifetime. He visualized this university as a meeting place of the East and the West, as a nest where the world will meet. In this nuclear age, when we are all apprehensive of a long nuclear winter, such nests all over the world are very much necessary, and we are very proud that Tagore had thought of such a nest, such interchange and interaction many years before we faced the problem of the present day world.
Our new education policy derives much from the philosophy and practice of Gurudev. Our fundamental aim is to replace a quantum increases in education by parallel improvements in quality. We mustn't consider education, more education, as a replacement or substitute for good or better education.
In the new education policy, as we have noticed, there's much emphasis on vocational training, on dissemination of knowledge. But Tagore had realized knowledge or information for the sake of living does not make a total man.
যাতে মানুষ একটা কমপ্লিট ম্যান, যেটা উনি বলেছেন,
Rabindranath wanted to create a complete man. He was interested in the wholesome development of a person's personality. He wanted to fashion the society after the ideals he cherished most. That is why he built this large institution.
দেখি তারে নিত্যই নূতন আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন, আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন। মোদের তরু মূলের মেলা, মোদের খোলা মাঠের খেলা, মোদের নীল গগনের সোহাগ মাখা সকাল সন্ধ্যা বেলা। মোদের তরু মূলের মেলা, মোদের খোলা মাঠের খেলা, মোদের নীল গগনের সোহাগ মাখা সকাল সন্ধ্যা বেলা। শালে ছায়া বিধি বাজায় মনে গলা গীতি, শালে ছায়া বিধি বাজায় মনে গলা গীতি সাজায়। পাতার নাচে মেতে আছে আমলকি কানন আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন, আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন। আমরা যেথায় মরি ঘুরে সেজে যায় না কবু দূরে, মোদের মনের মাঝে প্রেমের সেতার বাঁধা যেতার সুরে। আমরা যেথায় মরি ঘুরে সেজে যায় না কবু দূরে, মোদের মনের মাঝে প্রেমের সেতার বাঁধা যেতার সুরে। প্রাণের সঙ্গে প্রাণের সেজে মিলিয়েছে এক টানে মোদের, প্রাণের সঙ্গে প্রাণের সেজে মিলিয়েছে এক টানে মোদের। ভাইয়ের সঙ্গে ভাইকে সেজে করেছে এক মন আমাদের শান্তি নিকেতন।